Okay, so this is going to be kind of an explanation of what to look for when you purchase some of the more common type of antique padlocks. Now, these are all either bronze or brass cladded type locks, and there are certainly a myriad of other type of materials, and the only other thing would be steel casted or steel clad. Um, I'm not a big collector of steel cladded locks unless they're galvanized, and in which case a lot of them are either rusted to some degree. And a lot of the great locks were once painted, and you're lucky if you can get some of the original paint material still left on the lock. And more often than not, the paint is completely gone, and what you're left with is a lot of rust. And some collectors are very happy to go stick the locks in some sort of electrolysis machine and clean up the lock. But I have my reservations about using electrolysis because I think it's going to damage the springs on the molecular level. And what you can't see can hurt you. So without further ado, let me explain what I'm looking for when I look at a lock. I guess there are probably people out there that have a professional grading system, but I think a lot of it's somewhat obvious. You want to look at the chain, making sure that this has been not changed, and usually the first link would be your first clue. And you want to look at the rivet on there to make sure that hasn't been recently replaced or stamped. It's going to look as rusted as the rest of the clevis. Overall, you want to look at the lock for its rich patina, and you want to look at whether or not the lock has been opened, and any lock for that matter. You can see this is a very well sealed lock. And what would you look for in a case like this? Perhaps the rivets would start to look visible, and you might see tiny little sliver indentations where someone took a razor blade. Look for pry marks. And some people are very clever about getting into locks. And the more clever you are, the more harder it's going to be for the average person to detect a hack. So the next thing you're going to want to look at is the spring-loaded cover. Now, not all locks have a spring-loaded cover. Wilson Bohannon did a spring-loaded cover and a non-spring-loaded cover, and then of course some locks without covers at all. So this has a very strong spring load, and it's got very good tolerances from the side view. It's not bent. I've seen a lot of these things. They look like they're almost 3 feet off the ground. I'm exaggerating, of course. Another thing you're going to want to look at is the center pin, making sure that if it's a riveted type, this one's casted in place, make sure it's there, first of all. I've seen some sellers not even show a picture of the keyway. You always want a picture of the keyway, and you find the center pin is broken off. Oh, wow, that's just really upsets me. So in this case, it's there. You want to look inside the lock to see if there's any kind of forensic evidence where someone's been trying out keys, and a fresh removal of the patina inside the keyway, you'll be able to determine whether or not someone's been using keys on the lock. And that's true of all antique locks. Just look to see when you first get it if someone's been hacking it. You know, you'll see fresh removal of the patina, like bright brass color is what you'll see at the bottom of the lock. And even the lever tumblers, look at the profile of the lever tumbler edges to see if you see fresh brass where the patina has been removed on the lever tumblers. So here is a popular Yale lock, spring-loaded. This is a stamped rivet, and you can put your finger in there or a tool and see that it doesn't wiggle. It's got a really good spring load. These are all factory rivets. Now, some of the patina is worn off because of contact to surface, and when you hold a lock more often than you should, some of the edges of the patina will start to wear, and that's not very good. So be careful how you handle your locks when working with them. Probably want to wear white gloves or some sort of gloves to keep the patina from wearing down. So a lot of locks, people that hack into them, you'll find that the rivets just don't look factory. Inconsistency. Sometimes people will put they'll restamp the rivets, and you'll see a little divot in the center of the rivet, and it just isn't factory. So you have to kind of get knowledge about what a factory rivet looks like on a particular lock, because they're going to vary to some degree. You should never see any kind of file marks around the rivet. Sometimes you'll see one side of the lock that'll look really, really good, and then the other side of the lock you can see hacksaw marks or file marks. And again, here's another lock that's very well sealed. There's no hack. Um, Overall, you want to do a spring rebound test. Have the seller take the lock and push down on the shackle to see if there's any rebound. Unfortunately, not all locks you're going to be able to do that with, because some locks just don't have any rebound. Here's a good example. There's no rebound at all, but the spring's still good. You just don't know. So what can you do? You can have the seller do a shake test. Make sure you hold the key barrel if it's a flat key style padlock. Any kind of loose parts you want to hold, just hold those loose parts in a way so jiggle the lock to see if there's any kind of loose parts. It's even more critical where there's a big heavy spring, because sometimes those springs break. Here's an example of a lock that's got a broken lever tumbler, and you wouldn't know it unless you're a professional. You get the lock home and you do a little rebound on each individual lever tumbler, and you see that one sticks up and doesn't come down unless you hold or orient the lock upward, where gravity is allowing the lever tumbler to float down, if it even does at all, because sometimes tolerances are so tight that even with gravity the lever tumblers won't float back down. So yeah, if you're really into the key making like I am, you're really not going to be able to make some of these determinations until you have the lock in your possession. And frankly, there's just a lot of sellers that just don't know better. So for the most part, you just have to kind of go with your gut and make sure that pictures are really good. Natural sunlight is really, really important as opposed to artificial light. Some of these LED lights, they just whitewash the locks and they really don't do the patina justice. So always try to get your locks done in natural light, and that's really, really important. Um, the other thing is just be careful with locks that are sold with keys. More often than not, you'll find keys that work the lock, but not really. What do I mean by that? You could stick a key, like aim sword. That's a really good example. I see a lot of aim sword padlocks with working key as it's described. And what happens is it's usually a key from, let's say, an Eagle 6-bitted padlock, and they do a tryout key. Yeah, it works. So it's like, oh yeah, I got a working key. Well, that key only works the lock in one direction, usually counterclockwise. And the aim sword keys should operate the key or the lock 360 degrees in either direction. So what you're getting is a key that works, but it's really not the proper key for the lock. And why is that bad? Because when the tumbler's surfaces do not line up properly with the key bitting and there's overlap, you're going to get some frictioning, and that's going to cause improper wear on the lever tumblers. So for me, for someone to sell a lock with a working key that's not the right key, that's a hack for me. That's a hack. And I just don't like locks that have keys that work. And a lot of times that can damage the lock. And even when it comes to picking, I don't like really messing with the lever tumblers any more than I have to, because it's very important to keep the mechanics looking good. And for me, knowing that I'm scraping the lever tumblers and damaging the surfaces, and even when you're making a key for some of these multi-tumbler padlocks, you have to be very careful with the type of metal you're using and making sure that your keys are properly beveled down so that you're not cutting into the lever tumblers and ruining the tolerances. That's really bad. So sometimes we do more damage ourselves than before we ever got the lock. And it's just very important that you know what you're doing when it comes to impressioning, which I really don't like to use that much. I find using L wires I really love that. That gives you a lot better advantage, in my opinion. And then you can use impressioning, kind of a marriage between the two. So I hope this helps you. I hope you understand some of the things you're going to be looking for when buying locks. And I think that this is a great video that answers some of those basic questions. Thank you.